I'll ask a few initial questions, and then I'm sure there are many questions out there in the audience. This is not the most. This is certainly not a representative narrative for the slave experience. I understand that you explored a number of possibilities before you discovered this particular story. Were you initially interested in depicting the sort of more traditional experience of slavery from beginning to end before you arrived at this particular story?
I didn't really know what the traditional idea of slavery was, because I wanted to find out what it was, really. It's just one of those things. Someone asked me the other day for the first time, a question I maybe should have known, I should have been asked before. What was it like when you first found out about slavery? And I could never remember. But all I remembered as a young person was a tremendous sense of shame, real sense of, embarrassment, really. So in some ways, I think why I wanted to make this film, in some ways, is to, as I said this before, is to somehow try to sort of embrace it and tame it, master it, but also to sort of to make it mine as such. It's very important that. So I went into researching slavery as such with open eyes. I couldn't go in there with a preconceived idea. I wouldn't have. That's just not me. So whatever happened, whatever I would have discovered, I would have discovered. So it was just trying to look for a way in to the tale, and the way in for me was the whole idea of a free man who gets caught into slavery. And what I liked about that is that everyone in the audience could relate to Solomon being taken away from his family. So therefore, you're on that journey with him. So I thought that could be interesting. And then, of course, my wife, after speaking with her about it, she found this book. And I thought, what's this book? And I sort of had it in my hand. And I opened the book, and I looked at it. It was just strange, because we have an idea, and it becomes this screenplay, basically, in your hand. It's incredible. And that was it.
One of the things that is very striking about Solomon on watching this a second time today is that there doesn't seem to be, perhaps there's no real moment of despair, and that there's a very strong Christian faith that seems to carry him through his ordeal. Perhaps the moment at the end where he destroys the violin is the nearest you could come to, perhaps symbolizing an act of despair. Mm-hmm. But I'm interested in the fact that his religious conviction is the thing that preserves him, within himself, and yet that's a religion that he shares with his oppressors.
Yeah, as we know, through the centuries, I think, religion has kept a lot of people sane, one way, shape, form, or the other, especially in the United States, or insane, for that matter. He had to hold on to something, otherwise all is lost. And for me, I didn't see it in that sense of Christianity in a way. Not really. In the book, he calls on God a lot. But for me, that wasn't interesting. That was interesting, but it wasn't as. It was about his own self determination, his own courage, his own gathering up of his own will in order to keep on going was much more my interest. And of course, when we do have that symbol, that image of him joining with the choir, with Roll, Jordan, Roll. For me, it was a moment of it was a cathartic sort of. It was a cathartic moment. He had to pour out. He had to come out at some point. That for me was that what you spoke about. I don't know if I answered that question well. I apologize if I hadn't.
As well as this being a film in which you're trying to understand the experience of slavery, it seems to me, to some degree, this is also an effort to try to understand the mentality of men who are prepared to treat other men as property. And I think that there are two particular characters, the character played by Paul Dano and the character played by Michael Fassbender, who represent a kind of a level of hysteria and hatred. More perhaps the hatred applies more to the Paul Dano character. And I'm very curious as to what your sense is of where that originates, that hysteria and that hatred.
Well, I think with Paul's character, we spoke about Tibet. I mean, I always thought, I spoke to him, our idea that was that, this guy was beaten, by his father. And the whole idea of, him being this person who's just very violent. I mean, often the situation is this, I come from a West Indian family. And I imagine in the United States, it's maybe a similar thing, was that, a lot of parents beat their children. And this comes from slavery. I was beaten by my mother. I was beaten by my father with a belt. And this comes from slavery. It comes from you see something and you do it back. You do it. You think it's good to do to your children. So the Paul Dano character for me was about that. Of course, he is a white Southerner and he has these views on slaves and black people. But for me, it came from a sense of him being beaten by his father, as well as, of course, who he was. The thing with Michael Fassbender, Master Epps, is that he doesn't know how to deal with his condition of him being, basically passionately in love with Patsy. He doesn't know how to deal with it. And the only way he can deal with it, or basically destroy that love, is through violence, is to destroy that love for her through violence. And it's kind of interesting that again it goes back to so many things. When people are it's I can't go into it too deep here. It's a bit too much, I suppose. But the violence is a very interesting thing in the sense of how it perpetuates within history, within families, and so forth, and with other people, and within people you love. I mean, love is very obviously close to hate. And we know what happens then. But it's a very, don't want to get too bogged down in this question because it would get too complicated, but it's an interesting thing to actually have a chat about.
Okay, let's open it up to the press. Yes?
Hello, Mr. McQueen. I have some psychology question. So what did you learn about psychology of slavery when you was working on this film, and how this yes, about the psychology of slavery, and how did this knowledge change you, maybe?
Okay, thank you. What did I learn about the psychological slavery? Yeah, yeah. Survival. I think that's the biggest thing. You learn on what you do to survive, what you block out to survive. I'm here because certain members of my ancestors survived slavery in whatever way they could. And they weren't Bruce Willis with an AK-45 and a grenade. They had to deal with it how they had to deal with it, which was surviving. It wasn't pretty. It was. I mean, could you imagine being born a slave? I mean, I think that's the worst thing that could ever happen to a human being. Someone who's born a slave, someone who doesn't think of themselves as anything other than what the so-called master thinks of them, which is nothing. The psychological damage of that you are born into an environment where you are nothing. And I think, when you sort of fast forward slavery to today, and you walk down around the streets, you see the evidence of slavery everywhere in America, in the West Indies, in London, in Europe. You see the evidence of it. I mean, this stuff has not been dealt with. You think of the Holocaust, you think, what happened in Germany and so forth. And I think people are actually study that, dealt with that, dealing with it, and continuously deal with it. Slavery hasn't even started. It's a deep psychological wound. Deep.
Why do you think that it is a subject that we have not come to terms with?
Wow. Yeah, but we're talking about something different. That's one thing for sure. But I think it's deep. It's difficult for people to sort of deal with. It's difficult. People rather look away than to look at it. But that's life, huh? I don't know.
I was wondering if there was any hesitation in your actors that you cast in taking the role because it's such a huge subject?
No, there was. I mean, there was no hesitation from people. The people know. I mean, they're actors and they're first class, and you know, they're. It's yeah. I mean, we won't have any drama if no one wants to play human beings. So yeah, no, there wasn't too much of that. Yeah, no.
Yes.
I wanted to go back to the dealing with it. What do you see as a way that we could start dealing with it? Besides this film, what else would start more dialogue about what happened and the remnants of that today?
Well, I think we are. I mean, again, I think with the film, you know, it does. Obviously, it has helped that people are actually talking about it and so forth. So I think, yeah, it's you know, people are starting to talk. I mean, you know, I'm sure it will end very soon after people start talking about it. But it's as long, you know, just to try to keep it in focus, try to keep it in, you know, in the fore, really, just to try and have that conversation. And it's a difficult one, but it's a necessary one because, you know, you guys are all living together. We're living together. So, you know, if you're going to live together, one has to help each other. That's how it is, you know. Fact, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, in fact.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very
Cheers.
much. I wanted to ask you about your use of image in this film. You are telling a story, and there are certain images that stand out very clearly that are accomplished with hard and soft focus, with painterly images that could exist prior to the invention of cameras, and also with the use of light, starting with, for example, the bright blue eyes of the slave trader that are highlighted very early on and highlight his character, actually increase our understanding of his character and his role in the film. I'd like to ask you about how you worked with the cinematographer and how you managed to create those striking, stunning images that so contribute to the storytelling.
Well, thank you for the question. I've been working with Sean Bobbitt for the last 13 years. He's a cinematographer. Actually, he's a Texan, but has been living in England for goodness knows how long. So I've been working with my artwork. So we know each other for a very, very long time. And you know, it's just first it's about the color. We talk about color, of course, and you know, this is the first time I've actually sort of almost like I feel like I've shot outdoors in an environment which is so lush. So the palette is very, very important to talk about, you know, for example, and also working with a costume designer, Patty Norris, for example. She took earth samples from all 3 of the plantations to match them with the clothes, to match them to having conversations with Sean, to deal with the kind of temperature of each plantation. Of course, each character temperature, of course. So that dictates it a bit in that way. So it was pretty. There's a lot to talk about. I mean, maybe we could talk outside about it a little bit more, but there was a lot of that kind of minute detail. But for example, there's a beautiful, it's terrible, scene, for example, where Michael Fassbender and Lupita Nyong'o in the rape scene, for example. What I very much liked about that, I liked the silhouette, you know, the profile, the very sort of European profile, Michael, and then the very African, beautiful profile of Lupita. So these kind of, and that was very silhouette. And I love that the intensity of that, but also the sort of, it was just one of those things where we discussed. We didn't look at films, we looked at books, a lot of books, and you know, again, when I read the book, I had images in my head immediately. I think you do all your hard work, you know, about images and stuff, and when you see films all the time, don't you? So when you come to make your film, it's like you've trained for Olympics. And you know, when the gun goes 100-meter line, you're ready. So all that information is in there. So I wasn't looking at movies or references like that. Oh, I had it all in my head. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you for an excellent rendition of the slave narrative literature. Okay. And I wanted to ask you, in doing this movie, you know, when one reads the slave narrative literature, it's a huge evolution and variation in the literature, but there's certain tropes that are repeated. The Christian morality, the nature of how these narratives were related to the abolitionist audience that they were written for and the general audience they were written for. How did you interrelate with that sort of literature? Why pick Solomon Northup when there are all sorts of other slave narratives to choose from?
Well, Solomon was the one that sort of matched my original idea, and it was just so striking, this journey from a freeman in the North. I mean, 10% of African Americans at that time lived in the North and were free. So the whole idea of this musician, accomplished man, with his wife, she's a cook, and these children living a very kind of quiet, tranquil life. I love the idea, like I said before, of just taking them, just grabbing someone from them and bringing them into, a not particularly pleasant ordeal. And you go with him. That's what it was interesting for me. That sort of that journey, as far as the Christian and it was interesting because I always So I always thought about this film as being a science fiction movie. Oh wow, because some guy lands on Earth and there's this book called the Bible, and everyone interprets it in a different way. And there's these people who are slaves, and these people aren't slaves. It's incredible. It's so surreal, so far-fetched, but it was true. So that was interesting for me. And again, it reminded me of Pinocchio. The two guys seducing Solomon to Pinocchio to the circus. It was Hamilton and Brown. So it was like a Brothers Grimm fairy tales. The darkest, deepest, haunting fairy tales, which end happily ever after. But you go through hell to get there. And I think the children's book, the Brothers Grimm, are just amazing books. And I thought, oh, it has this kind of Brothers Grimm quality to it. So it had a classical storytelling structure to it. So I thought it was beautiful, Okay.
Yes.
This being your third movie with Michael Fassbender, when you were working on the script or even reading the book, did you have him for the character of Edwin immediately, or what was that process like?
Well, it's one of those things with Michael, don't take him for granted. I mean, he's not going to do things because I'm doing it. So it's one of those things where it has to be bloody good before you present him anything. So yes, he was always my choice for that. And he's an amazing actor. I mean, me personally, I think he's the most influential actor of his time right now. I mean, he's like a Mickey Rourke when he was Mickey Rourke, or Gary Oldman when he was Gary Oldman. I mean, Michael Fassbender is that person now. I mean, people want to be an actor because of him. People want to be in a movie because of him. People want to make a movie because he could be in a movie. So he has that kind of pull, that quality, because people want to get, jam with him. He's like Ginger Bacon and shit,
Yes.
I've got to learn how to smile. Apparently, Steve, you have to smile. I'm happy. I'm just British.
Given the number of really powerful, emotionally wrenching scenes, and I assume there's a certain amount of improvisation to those, were there moments where you guys had to stop for a minute and you were just so overcome by the emotionality of filming that scene, or were there scenes that took a lot to get people up to that level of emotionality that?
No, I think all the hard work comes in rehearsal. The hard work comes in rehearsal. As far as spontaneity and stuff is concerned, there's slight deviations for sure, absolutely, but not because when you're working with actors like this and you're rehearsing, they're so good that you want to stop. Oh, let's stop that. Let's not do any more. So you again, it's light training, and then when you say action or whatever you say. Actually, I don't say that. The other guy says that. I say, it's a cut. I'm trying to be funny here, but I'm making myself laugh because I wanted to say action, but I can't. So anyway, what happens is that what happens is when you say action or someone else's action and they're doing it, it becomes like a sphere because we train, we've talked so often, we've talked a lot, there's a lot of trust with each other, that they become spheres. So whatever they do is correct. It's beautiful, it's magic. It's kind of like, you work for that. You have to work damn hard to get there, of course, but you have to trust something as well. Again, they become spheres, amazing. And then everything they do, anything they do, wherever they go is correct. Wow, it's amazing.
So thank you for your film. What I was saying is that you capture the brutality of slavery, including the fact that even the kindnesses of the slave owners were filled with indifference and brutality, whereas they essentially, even when they were being kind with bringing a sweet treat or just everything was just so, as an African American, I was crying throughout the film. It was just one of the things that really touched me there. Was there a scene for you that as you look back on the film itself that stays with you in some way?
Not really. I mean, the whole thing stays with me. I think, I mean, I can't, it's like picking one thing over another. It's not like that. It's the experience. It's the whole shebang, really. Yeah, it's not one thing. It's the whole thing for me. But yes, I mean, obviously other people have favorites and whatnot. Yeah.
Yes, in sort of there, yeah.
Having not read the book, I found it interesting in, I would like to know if in the book, Solomon Northup recorded the brutality of the wife in terms of her jealousy of the woman that her husband was in love with. Was that in the book, and how did you feel about showing that? Because usually in American film, the wife of the slave owner is never a villain, and yet there's been documentation in slave narratives of the real brutality that women also participated in, especially against women, other slave women.
Yeah, I mean, we found out a lot through research. We found out there's one story, I think, which plantation was that? It's a plantation that we didn't film in the end, we did a little research, where one woman, she knew that one of the children was spawned from her husband, actively went out to sell. I mean, of course, this is common. This is one story that we personally found out, but this is common knowledge. Went out and sold the child, and she said, you know, she wanted to kill the child. She wanted to kill the child, and then what happened was the plantation owner had some kind of mercy, and he got him. He forced the slave woman, to sell the child, because the wife was going to kill it. Was going to kill it. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's I mean, horror stories. I mean, as you can imagine, I mean, violence is the thing here, I think, and also the whole idea of love, though. It's kind of weird because I'm sitting here talking to you about this film, but at the same time, I'm a survivor to some extent, and most people, again, who are involved in this in one way, shape, or form are survivors. And it's one of those things where I'm sort of talking around in circles here, but this comes back down to this word called love, and it sounds odd and it sounds weird, but it is, because in some ways the whole idea to survive is to sort of, understand. And if you don't understand, then you have this sort of whole idea of bitterness and a whole idea of anger and all this kind of stuff, and it goes round and round in circles. So you have to have a situation of to understand and to love. And I think what's wonderful for me about this whole experience is just to sort of to delve in deep into the whole idea of nature of slavery, but to come out kind of come out sane again, because you could actually lose yourself.
I'm sorry that we're out of time. I'd love to take more questions, but Steve McQueen, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.